Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of the Tar Heels Insider Podcast right here on SI. I'm your host, Grant Sasher, the lead beat writer for the Tar Heels on SI website. Bring you all the latest updates for all things UNC and specifically football, right? We're in what week two, like two and a half. Well, we're starting the end of week two of the fall camp, of course, as they started last weekend. So now we'll be completing the second week of fall camp. Of course, the next media availability will be on Wednesday. Well, this upcoming Wednesday, the 13th. So the season's starting to pick up. We're starting to get closer and closer to the season, and I think everyone here in Chapel Hill and really just across the nation is really excited about this upcoming season. You know, there's a lot of hype around Bill Belichick being in UNC. Of course, there's going to be a Hulu show that's going to be documenting the whole season. There's been a lot of things that have been brought into the fold for pregame activities, and also North Carolina they brought back the old well walk. So that just shows you the amount of things that have been just picking up a steam just because of the arrival of Bill Belichick. And the reason why people are so excited about Bill Belichick is, not only is that he has, 8 rings as a coach, right? He's won 6 as a head coach, right, with the Patriots. And then he also won 2 as a defense coordinator with the Giants, where he also was Lawrence Taylor's position coach and also the defensive play caller. So there's a lot of hype around that, right? You got the greatest head coach in football history, regardless of level. Uh, but the thing is that he's one of the greatest defensive play callers ever, right? Just regardless of level. He's highly respected, and one of the biggest reasons why the Patriots dynasty, if existed, yes, was of course because of Tom Brady. You have to acknowledge that, of course. But that those defenses were amazing. They were strategic. They were suffocating, and a lot of times they really didn't have those big name type of players. I mean, maybe outside of Vince Wilfork and maybe a couple other guys, they really didn't have any Hall of Famers on the defense, right? I think Vince Wilfork and maybe a couple other players were really the only ones that were Hall of Famers, and that's because of Bill Belichick's defensive strategies, um, and that's what he's been known for. Right, of course, and that really helped because Tom Brady, his first 3 Super Bowls, he was a solid quarterback, right? He was a Pro Bowl quarterback, and he also was a clutch quarterback, right? But he didn't become Tom Brady didn't become Tom Brady till 2007. That's when they went undefeated. He threw 50 touchdown passes, which at the time was the most in a single season in NFL history, and we all know the rest of the story. But because Bill Belichick is here, the expectation is that the defense improve, which I think it will. Just because of the guys you brought on the transfer board, you brought in experienced players who've done a lot at their previous stops. I really like the defensive backfield. I'm a huge fan of the defensive backfield because really out of all the position groups on the defense, really you can even the team. The defensive backs are returning the most players from last season, right? Marcus Allen is returning a cornerback. Will Hardy, who was a rotational guy, who often played a lot, even though he didn't start, he played a lot. He was a reliable player. Now he get his chance to start. He'll be back there at safety. And then, of course, Caleb Cost is coming back as well. He'll be probably your nickel or star. So he'll be back as well. And of course, you brought in Thaddeus Dixon, who's a hell of a player. All Big Ten honorable mention last season for Washington, played under Steve Belichick. And then, yeah. And then, also you brought in Gavin Gibson from ECU, who is who's a player that can play multiple positions on the field. He can play in the box. He can play deep. He can play slot corner. He can play corner. He can do a whole lot of things. So there's a lot of versatile pieces on the defense, including a linebacker, right? You got to talk about Kamori House and his versatility. And then also Andrew Simpson is a big-time player. He was a big-time player for Boise State the last few seasons. Of course, he also was a key contributor to their playoff run last year. But enough of I know we are talking about those guys, and I think linebackers and cornerbacks are great, and I even think their edge rushers are great. Right? You brought in Price Yates, you brought in Smith Vilbert, you also brought in Melkart Abu Jaude, who was a hell of a player at Delaware. Yes, he was at the FCS level, but he was an all conference player. You brought in experienced players on the defensive end, right? But my concern is with the interior defensive line. I think they have good players, right? And CJ Mims is an excellent player from ECU. Last season, he had 23 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1.1.5 sacks, a forced fumble, and 11 stops. Right? He played 576 snaps the last 2 seasons. Who he's a hell of a player. All right, very effective run stopper. He can play the nose or through tech. DeAndre Robinson. He played 1 season at Florida as a true freshman. And he played more of a rotation role, but he played a lot. And also he played meaningful snaps as a player in the SEC at an SEC program like Florida. 17 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, and 3 stops. That was in 162 snaps. He wasn't a starter, so he still was highly productive as a guy who's a rotational player. And he also had a 79.8 tackling grade according to PFF and 0. I repeat, 0 missed tackles. Of course, he needs to improve his pressure rate, but he has potential. Remember, he was only a true freshman last year, so he has time to grow. Isaiah Johnson, transferred from Arizona. He was a post-spring transfer from Arizona. Played 170 snaps in 10 games, 9 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks, and very limited production. So, imagine once you increase his production to about 300 snaps, what can he do? He's an excellent run stuffer, but he does have pass rush ability with a 10.2 pass rush pressure rate, which is really good. But the caveat with the defensive line is that outside those 3 guys did not play for North Carolina last year, right? Of all of North Carolina's players that are returning from last year, I'm talking about on the interior defensive line, right? There's only 3 snaps returning from last year, and that was from Leroy Jackson, which is pretty not the most ideal situation in the world. I mean, of course, you brought in 3 experienced transfers, but that's why they brought in 3 experienced transfers, because you want 3 snaps from last year. And Leroy Jackson, of course, will be a huge part of the defense this year. He spoke at the media days on Wednesday, so we got to hear a good bit from him. But if you look at the website, you look at the roster, I'm going to go through. So I'm going to go through guys who play. I know for a fact play defensive tackle, right? Devin Ankrum, 6'2", 295, freshman. Trey Giddens, 6'3", 275, freshman. Leroy Jackson, 6'1", 290. He's the only player on this defensive line that's returning that has actually played snaps last season. Redshirt freshman. Isaiah Johnson, we just mentioned, redshirt junior. So he's a veteran guy. But keep going down. Xavier Lewis, I think he might be a walk-on, but still, 6 foot, freshman. Nico Maggio, 6'1", 290, freshman. CJ Mims, of course, is junior. He's going to be a guy who's going to play a lot of snaps for North Carolina. I think he's going to be one of the starters for sure. 6'2", 300, junior, right? Peter Bazansky, 6'2", 290, redshirt freshman. DeAndre Robinson, who did play a good bit for Florida last season, redshirt freshman. Kamarion Thomas, 6'3", 280, freshman. Ladarian Williams, 6'4", 310, freshman. That's a lot of really young players. That's a lot of freshmen on that defensive line. And I do think that this interior defensive line is talented. But I also think it's going to be the weak link because you need more depth. And all the guys behind CJ Mims, CJ Mims and Isaiah Johnson are the only 2 guys on the roster that are not listed as freshmen. Of course, DeAndre Robinson, of course, played 10 games, 11 played in 11 games in Florida last year, but he's listed as a redshirt freshman. There's a lot of freshmen on this interior defensive line, and so if you really, to put it frankly, they might be the youngest unit on this football team. If you really think about it, right? Because the running backs, you still have, Davion Goss is a sophomore. Benjamin Hall is a junior. I think. I think he's a junior. I think he's a junior. And then Caleb Hood's played 5 years. The receivers, a lot of those guys are sophomores or juniors, right? The offensive line, a lot of those guys are veterans. The edge rushers, those guys are juniors, seniors, right? Then linebackers, Kamari House is a sophomore. Andrew Simpson is a senior. Who else? And then Makai Bayer, he is a guy who's junior or senior. He's, you know what I'm saying? And then we all know about the defensive backs. A lot of the defensive backs are, one of the more outside of the offensive linemen. The defensive backs are the most veteran group in terms of players coming back and also old guys on the team. So, I know Bill Belichick wants to be this physical unit, right? I mean, the offense wants to be a pro style, very physical offense. Now, of course, with some spread concepts, but a typical pro style offense that's physical. They want to have a physical running game along with an effective passing game. Defense, the same thing with the defense. They want to run a pro defense. Steve Belichick runs a pro defense. A lot of the philosophies that they have come from coaching professional football players. And for you to run a pro defense, you have to stop the run. You have to stop the run. I mean, if you look at UNC's stats from last season, I mean, they were not great. I wrote down here, but last year they were 72nd in rush defense. So yeah, there were 66 in rush defense in 24. In 23, they were 90th. They were 85th in 2022, and they're 97th in 2021. They've been at best a mediocre run defense, right? Outside maybe last season. Last season they were below average, but the three previous seasons before last year, they were a mediocre rush defense. And you can't scheme around that. If you don't have the greatest quarterback in the world, you can scheme around that. If you don't have a great run game on offense, you can't scheme around that. If you have a weak defensive backfield, you have a weak secondary, you can scheme around that. But if you don't have a good interior defensive line, if you don't have good interior defensive line and you can't stop the run, you can't scheme around that. You just can't. And I think that is the biggest concern for North Carolina going this year. Yeah, sure. And I think this defense will be improved. I know there's a lot of North Carolina fans that are kind of skeptical and kind of let's wait and see, because I understand, right? Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the defensive stats right now. But this defense has a chance to improve, but the interior defensive line has to show it, right? You only returned 3 snaps from last season. Sure, you have 3 veteran defensive linemen you brought into the transfer portal, but you need depth at that position. You need depth on defensive line. I think they're going to have that for the edge rushers. I really do. But I don't think they have that yet for the interior defensive line. Now, to be fair, I really haven't seen them practice much because we have very few media availability days, right? We went to the first media day on Wednesday. We really didn't get a chance to see the defense because the offense was closer to us. And not only that, they weren't in full pads. So you really weren't going to learn anything. And we only got to see 15, 20 minutes of it, right? Last Wednesday, it was just nothing but press conference. They had an off day. And it was more of a film day. They're just viewing film, having meetings and whatnot, but they didn't have practice. So we haven't gotten a chance to see the practice. So hopefully on this upcoming Wednesday, we will. So I think it would be better to evaluate what this defense can be. But unfortunately, we haven't been able to see that. But this defense line, I'm kind of concerned about the interior defense line more than anything because of the lack of experience you're bringing back. And yes, you did bring in some talented interior defensive linemen, right? Guys who have played meaningful snaps at the Division I level, including the SEC, the Big 12, and of course CJ Mims played at ECU, but he was a very good player at ECU starter, right? Deontre Robinson played meaningful snaps at Florida, an SEC school. He played against SEC competition, and then and then was Isaiah Johnson. Also was played a lot of meaningful snaps at Arizona. But can they? But those guys were rotation players. Can they do it on every snap? And they're going to have a much larger. You're going to have much larger production this year because they're going to be relied on more. Those three guys are going to be your three main, rotating, starting defensive linemen, right? But you need to find ways to build depth behind them. And I think this defense can improve, but the key for this defense to improve starts up front. And the bet, if you can get a push up front, I think it helps everything, right? Not only does the defense line create pressure and they can stop the run, but also it makes the defensive backs jobs easier. It makes the linebackers jobs easier. Everything starts up front. If you don't have a good up front, you're not going to win many games, right? A perfect example of a good up front, of course, was Clemson during the late 2010s, of course, when you had Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence, all those guys. The reason why Clemson was so dominant during that stretch is because of the defensive line. If you don't have a defensive line, you're not going to have a chance to win many games. I think they have all the pieces put in place to have a rebound year, a season where they can win 7, 8, 9, even possibly 10. They could have a chance to surprise some folks. But the only way you can surprise people is if you have a solid defensive line. It starts up front. It starts on the offensive line. It starts on the defensive line. If you don't have either of those things, you're not going to win many games. But I think they have an opportunity to do so, and I think this defense improves, and it starts up front. My name is Grant Sachere, the lead beat writer here on Tar Heels on SI. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Tar Heels on SI, and also make sure to follow me as well. That's my Twitter handle right there, or next to my name's last name, first name, and also make sure to follow and like our Facebook page. Same thing, Tar Heels on SI. And if you go to our website, everything is for free. Everything. There's no premiums. There's no paywall. Everything is for free. Make sure to check us out. We're producing a lot of fall camp content along with some basketball updates as well. Because even if basketball season's 2.5, 3 months away, people love basketball down here in Chapel Hill, and rightfully so. I mean, we have a 6-time national champion basketball team here in Chapel Hill. So make sure to go check that out on our website. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.